Nobody dared say a word to the billionaire's wife, until the new maid shocked everyone. The crystal chandelier caught the afternoon light, scattering rainbows across the marble floor of the grand entrance hall. But no one in the Whitmore mansion paused to admire its beauty. They were too busy trying to become invisible. "You call this polished?" Victoria Whitmore's voice sliced through the air like a blade. She stood at the base of the grand staircase, her designer heels clicking ominously against the marble as she circled the trembling housemaid clutching a silver tray. "I can see fingerprints." "Fingerprints? Do you have any idea how much this costs?" The young maid, barely 19, bit her lips so hard a spot of blood appeared. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll polish it again, right?" "You'll do more than polish it again." Victoria's perfectly manicured finger jabbed toward the girl's face. "You'll polish every piece of silver in this house. Tonight, before the dinner party. And if I see so much as a smudge, you're finished. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore." The words came out as barely a whisper. Around them, the staff had frozen in their various duties. The butler stood motionless by the door, his weathered face carefully blank. Two more housemaids had paused mid-step on the staircase, neither ascending nor descending, as if movement itself might draw Victoria's attention. In the doorway to the dining room, the chef's assistant had stopped breathing entirely. This was how it always went in the Whitmore mansion. Victoria ruled with an iron fist wrapped in Chanel, and everyone, learned quickly that the price of crossing her was too high to pay. From his study on the second floor, Alexander Whitmore heard his wife's voice and felt the familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He stood and moved to the doorway, his tall frame appearing at the railing overlooking the entrance hall. His staff called him Mr. Alex, never just Sir, because despite his billions, despite the empire he'd built from nothing, he treated them like human beings. But Victoria was different. He watched as his wife continued her tirade, her voice growing shriller with each word. The young maid's shoulders shook with silent tears. Alexander's jaw clenched. He wanted to intervene, wanted to tell Victoria that dignity and kindness were worth more than spotless silver. But they had guests arriving in 3 hours, important investors from Singapore, and the last time he contradicted Victoria in front of the staff, she made everyone's life miserable for a week. So he stood there, silent, hating himself for it. And another thing, Victoria was saying now, her voice dripping with disdain. "Tell Maria that if I find one more wrinkle in the tablecloths, she can pack her bags. I don't care if she's been with this family for 15 years. There are 1,000 people who would kill for her job." Maria, the head housekeeper who had practically raised Alexander after his mother died, stood in the corner with her head bowed. At 58, she had nowhere else to go, and Victoria knew it. The front door opened, and Mrs. Chun, the head of household, entered with a young woman Alexander didn't recognize. The newcomer couldn't have been more than 25, with warm brown eyes and an air of quiet confidence that seemed out of place in the tension-thick atmosphere. She wore a simple black dress and sensible shoes, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Unlike everyone else in the room, she didn't look afraid. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mrs. Chun began carefully, "this is Elena Martinez, the new maid. She comes highly recommended from them. I don't care where she comes from." Victoria turned her glacial gaze on Elena, looking her up and down like she was inspecting a piece of questionable produce. Can she follow instructions? Can she work without making excuses? Can she understand that this household has standards? Elena met Victoria's stare with calm, steady eyes. "Yes, ma'am. I understand that excellence requires attention to detail." Something flickered in Victoria's expression, surprise, perhaps, that someone had responded with words instead of terrified stammering. But she recovered quickly, her lips curling into a cold smile. "We'll see. Mrs. Chun will show you your duties." And Elena. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "In this house, you speak only when spoken to. You bow your head when I pass. And you remember that you are replaceable. Are we clear?" For a long moment, Elena simply looked at her. Not defiant, not afraid, just looking, as if taking the measure of something complicated. Then she nodded once. Crystal clear, Mrs. Whitmore. As Mrs. Chun led Elena away toward the servants' quarters, Alexander watched the new maid go. There was something different about her, something that reminded him of who he used to be before the weight of expectations and social obligations had taught him to choose his battles carefully. Too carefully, perhaps. Elena's eyes lifted briefly as she passed beneath the second-floor railing, meeting Alexander's gaze for just a second. In that moment, he saw something unexpected, understanding. Not pity, not judgment, just a clear-eyed recognition of the complicated dynamics she'd walked into. Then she was gone, following Mrs. Chun down the hallway, and Alexander was left staring at the empty space where she'd been. Alexander. Victoria's voice yanked him from his thoughts. She stood at the base of the stairs, looking up at him with that expression he knew too well, the one that said she'd noticed him paying attention to something other than her. "Shouldn't you be getting ready? The Tanaka delegation arrives at 7. "I have time," he said quietly. "Well, don't waste it standing around watching the help." She turned on her heel and swept toward her private sitting room, leaving a wake of tension behind her. In the corner, Maria finally allowed herself to breathe. The young maid with the silver tray scurried away toward the kitchen. The butler resumed his post. Life in the Whitmore mansion returned to its normal state. Beautiful, luxurious, and absolutely suffocating. But somewhere in the servants' quarters, Elena Martinez was unpacking her single suitcase and taking stock of her new workplace. She'd worked in difficult households before. The ultra-wealthy often forgot that wealth didn't excuse cruelty, but she'd never seen anything quite like this. The fear in everyone's eyes wasn't just about losing a job. It was deeper than that, more personal. Mrs. Chin showed her the uniform closet, the supply storage, the kitchen protocols. The older woman spoke in hushed tones, as if Victoria might hear them even through several walls and floors. "The most important rule," Mrs. Chin said, her kind face creased with worry, "is to stay out of Mrs. Whitmore's sight as much as possible. Do your work perfectly, but invisibly. Never contradict her. Never question her. Never, ever make her feel challenged." Elena supplied softly. Mrs. Chen nodded, relieved that this young woman understood. "Exactly. She wasn't always like this. When she first married Mr. Alex 7 years ago, she was different. Softer. But something changed. Now," she trailed off, shaking her head. Elena folded her new uniform carefully. "And Mr. Whitmore? He's a good man," Mrs. Chin said quickly, almost offensively. "Truly good. He built his fortune on fair deals and treating people with respect. But with her, again, that helpless gesture. He tries to keep the peace. For everyone's sake, he says. But sometimes I wonder if the price of peace is too high." Through the small window of the servants' quarters, Elena could see the manicured gardens stretching toward the tree line. Somewhere in that beautiful mansion, a good man had learned to be silent, and a cruel woman had learned she could say anything. The staff had learned to disappear, but Elena had never been good at disappearing, and she'd never believed that cruelty should go unchallenged, no matter how expensive the house it lived in. "Thank you for the guidance, Mrs. Chun," she said, meeting the older woman's eyes. "I'll do my best to follow the rules." Mrs. Chin smiled, but something in Elena's tone made her uneasy. She'd hired dozens of maids over the years, and she'd learned to read them. This one was respectful, professional, and competent. But there was something else there too, a core of steel wrapped in kindness, a quiet certainty that some lines should never be crossed. Mrs. Chun just hoped that certainty wouldn't get the girl fired before the week was out. Or worse, that it wouldn't get them all fired for association. As evening settled over the Whitmore mansion, the staff moved through their preparations for the dinner party with practiced precision. And Elena Martinez began her first shift in a house where nobody dared say a word to the billionaire's wife. Not yet, anyway. Elena's first 3 days at the Whitmore mansion taught her more about human nature than a psychology degree ever could. She learned that fear had a smell, sharp and acidic like old metal. She learned that silence could be louder than shouting when it was pressed down by years of accumulated pressure. And she learned that cruelty, when allowed to flourish unchecked, became as normal as breathing. But most importantly, she learned to watch. She watched how Victoria moved through the house like a storm system, her mood determining whether the day would be merely tense or utterly unbearable. She watched how the staff had developed an elaborate warning system. A certain way of arranging flowers meant Victoria was in a rage. A specific placement of the morning newspaper signaled she'd be out for hours. A particular breakfast order indicated relative safety. She watched Alexander, too. The billionaire kept to his study most days, conducting business over video calls, and through his assistant, Michael, a quietly competent man in his 40s who seemed to genuinely care about his employer's well-being. When Alexander did emerge, he greeted the staff with genuine warmth, asking about their families, remembering birthdays, noticing when someone looked tired or unwell. But when Victoria entered a room, something in Alexander changed. Not dramatically. His smile didn't vanish, his posture didn't slump, but a light went out somewhere behind his eyes. He became careful, measured, as if he were walking on ice that might crack at any moment. It broke Elena's heart a little, watching a man who'd built an empire from nothing become so small in his own home. On Thursday morning, Elena was polishing the banister of the main staircase when she heard crying from the second-floor hallway. She followed the sound to find Sophia, the 19-year-old maid from her first day, huddled in an alcove near the library, her face buried in her hands. Elena glanced around to ensure they were alone, then knelt beside the girl. "Sophia? What happened?" "I can't do it," Sophia sobbed. "All the silver. She wants it done before the weekend charity gala. And there are 300 pieces, and I tried. I stayed up until 4 in the morning, but my hands are bleeding and I still have so much left, and if I don't finish she'll fire me, and my mother's medical bills." "Breathe," Elena said gently, taking Sophia's trembling hands. They were raw and blistered from hours of polishing. "Let me see what I can do." "You can't help," Sophia said miserably. "If she finds out you did my work, we'll both be fired. She always knows. It's like she has cameras everywhere, watching, waiting for us to make mistakes." Elena had noticed that too. How Victoria seemed to materialize whenever someone was struggling. How she always knew exactly where to direct her cruelty for maximum impact. But she'd also noticed something else. Victoria never entered the eastern wing before noon because the morning sunlight bothered her eyes. The silver pantry was in the eastern wing. "Does Mrs. Chen know about this?" Elena asked. Sophia shook her head. She'd try to help, and then Mrs. Whitmore would punish her too. "That's how it works here. Anyone who shows kindness gets crushed for it. So we all just survive alone." The girl's words hung in the air, a damning indictment of what this household had become. Elena helped Sophia to her feet. "Go rest. Put some salve on your hands. I'll handle the silver." "But I'm new," Elena said with a small smile. "If anyone asks, I volunteered because I wanted to learn the household standards. No one gets in trouble for a newcomer being overeager." Sophia's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time they were grateful. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Elena spent the next 4 hours in the silver pantry, working with efficiency born from years of experience in high-end households. She polished serving platters and candlesticks, gravy boats, and ornate picture frames, each piece emerging mirror-bright under her care. But she also thought, Victoria's cruelty wasn't random. It was strategic. She targeted the vulnerable, the young, the old, those with families to support, those with nowhere else to go. She created an environment where helping each other was punished, where kindness was seen as weakness. It was psychological warfare, expertly executed. But why? What had happened to turn a woman into this? "You work quickly." Elena turned to find Alexander standing in the doorway of the silver pantry. He'd changed from his usual business attire into jeans and a simple navy sweater, looking more human than billionaire. In his hands, he carried 2 cups of coffee. "Mr. Whitmore," Elena said, starting to stand. "Please don't." He offered her one of the cups. "I saw the light on in here and thought whoever was working deserved some caffeine. I didn't realize it was you." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thank you. That's very kind." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work with something like curiosity. "Mrs. Chun tells me you volunteered to help with the charity gala preparations. That's not required of new staff." "I wanted to learn the household standards," Elena said carefully, giving him the cover story. But when she glanced up, She saw understanding in his eyes. Sophie, his hands were bleeding. He said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sir, You don't have to explain. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that made him seem younger than his 37 years. I see more than people think I do. I know what happens in this house. I know my wife. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. I know it's not right. Then why allow it? The question escaped before Elena could stop it. She immediately bit her lip, expecting anger or dismissal. Instead, Alexander gave her a sad smile. You've been here less than a week, so you don't know the full history. But the short answer is, it's complicated. It usually is, Elena said softly. She returned to polishing a silver serving dome, but she could feel his gaze on her. What made you take this position? Alexander asked. Mrs. Chun said you came from the Hartford estate. That's one of the finest households in the state. This must be, he gestured vaguely. Different. I go where I'm needed, Elena said simply. And your household manager's request intrigued me. What did she tell you? Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. She said you were a good man in a difficult situation, and that your staff needed someone who wouldn't break. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When Elena looked up, she saw something raw in his expression, surprise, maybe, or relief that someone understood. My wife wasn't always like this, he said finally. When we met, she was ambitious, yes, but also vibrant and funny. She came from nothing, like me. We understood each other. He stared at his coffee. But after we married, after she entered this world of old money and social hierarchies, something changed. She became obsessed with status, with proving she belonged. And somewhere along the way, she started measuring her worth by how much power she could wield over others. And you stayed silent to keep the peace, Elena said, understanding. I stayed silent, because every time I confronted her publicly, she took it out on the staff later. Firings, impossible tasks, cruelty that lasted for weeks. His voice was heavy with guilt. I thought I was protecting them by not escalating. But maybe I was just protecting myself from having to make hard choices. Elena set down her polishing cloth and looked directly at him. Mr. Whitmore, may I speak frankly? I wish you would. Silence in the face of cruelty isn't protection. It's permission. Your staff don't need you to keep the peace. They need you to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Alexander stared at her, and Elena wondered if she'd gone too far. But then he smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. You're either very brave or very foolish, speaking to me like that. Probably both, Elena admitted. But someone needed to say it. With respect, sir, a good heart means nothing if it never finds the courage to act. He laughed, short and surprised. How old are you? 24. 24, and wiser than I am at 37. He shook his head. Mrs. Chun was right about you. You won't break. I've never seen the point in breaking, Elena said, returning to her work. When you break, the cruelty wins. And I don't believe in letting cruelty win. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Alexander eventually picking up a cloth and helping with the polishing despite Elena's protest that it wasn't appropriate. But he insisted, and there was something healing about the simple, shared task. Can I ask you something? Elena said as they finished the last of the candlesticks. Of course. What happened at your wedding? Mrs. Chun said something changed after that. Alexander's expression darkened. Victoria's family came. Her mother spent the entire reception making pointed comments about how Victoria had married up, how she should be grateful, how girls from her background usually don't land men like me. By the end of the night, Victoria was furious, not at her mother, but at the world, at everyone who'd ever looked down on her. And she swore she'd never be looked down on again. So she decided to do the looking down, Elena said softly. Exactly. And I didn't stop her because I understood the pain that drove it. I thought if I gave her time, if I showed her she was valued and respected, she'd let go of that anger. He set down the last polished piece. But anger is like a plant. If you keep feeding it, it grows. Before Elena could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Alexander straightened immediately, his expression shifting into something more guarded. A moment later, Victoria appeared in the doorway, her eyes sharp as she took in the scene. Alexander, what are you doing in the servants' area? Her tone was light, but Elena heard the danger underneath. Checking on preparations for the gala, he said smoothly. Elena was working late, so I brought coffee. Victoria's gaze moved to Elena, cold and assessing. How thoughtful. Elena, I trust you'll have all this completed by tomorrow morning. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. Good. Because I've decided to move the gala up by a day. We'll need everything ready by tomorrow evening. Her smile was pure venom. I hope that won't be a problem. It was an impossible timeline, and everyone in the room knew it. Elena met Victoria's eyes steadily. I'll make it work, ma'am. Wonderful. Such dedication. Victoria looped her arm through Alexander's. Come, darling. Let the help do her job. As they left, Elena heard Victoria's voice drifting back. Really, Alexander, you mustn't encourage familiarity with the staff. They start to forget their place. Elena sat alone in the silver pantry, surrounded by gleaming treasures, and understood exactly what she was up against. Victoria wasn't just cruel. She was calculating, and she just declared war on the new maid who dared to be kind. But Elena had fought battles before, and she'd learned something that Victoria had forgotten. Cruelty might be powerful, but kindness, true kindness backed by courage, was unbreakable. The game was on. The next morning, Elena woke at 5 to find Maria standing outside her door, wringing her hands. The older woman's face was drawn with worry, and she spoke in urgent whispers even though they were in the servants' wing, far from Victoria's suite. I heard about the gala being moved up, Maria said. Elena, that woman is setting you up to fail. The original timeline was already tight. Moving it up by a full day, it's impossible. She wants to fire you and make an example of you in front of everyone. Elena had figured as much. Has she done this before? 3 times in the past 2 years. Each time with someone who showed too much backbone, too much independence. Maria's eyes were sad. We lose the good ones, and the rest of us learn to just survive. Well, maybe it's time that changed. Elena squeezed Maria's hand. I need your help, though. Not with the silver. That's finished, but with understanding what Victoria really cares about. What would embarrass her most? Maria looked startled. What are you planning? Nothing terrible, Elena assured her. But if I'm going down fighting. And I'd rather not go down at all. By 6 a.m., Elena had assembled an unlikely council in the kitchen. Maria, Mrs. Chun, Sophia with her bandaged hands, Thomas the butler, and Chen Wei, the talented young chef who'd been too intimidated to show his full abilities since Victoria had criticized his amuse-bouche at a dinner party 6 months ago. Let me understand this correctly, Mrs. Chun said, her voice careful. You want us to help you not just complete an impossible task, but exceed expectations? Elena, even if we pull this off, she'll just find another way to attack you. Probably, Elena agreed. But she'll have to do it in front of her guests. And that changes everything. She spread out the gala timeline on the kitchen table. Victoria had invited 200 of the city's wealthiest and most influential people, a charity event that was really a showcase for her social climbing. The silver needed to be perfect, yes, but Elena had noticed something else in the planning documents. Victoria had designed the entire event herself, from the floral arrangements to the menu to the entertainment. It was her moment to shine, to prove she belonged in this world of old money and older traditions. She's made this gala about herself, Elena explained, which means her pride is on the line. We can use that. How? Thomas asked, intrigued despite his nervousness. Elena smiled. By making it absolutely perfect. So perfect that she can't find a single thing to criticize. So perfect that her guests will remember this night as the social event of the season. She wants to be seen as sophisticated and flawless. We'll give her exactly that, but we'll do it our way, with our values. Over the next hour, they crafted a plan. Chen Wei would create a menu that honored Victoria's chosen theme, but elevated it with his considerable talents. Maria would coordinate the decor with small, meaningful touches, flower arrangements that told stories of hope and resilience, place cards written in elegant calligraphy that quoted famous philanthropists. Thomas would train the serving staff to move like dancers, making the dinner service itself a form of art. And Elena? Elena would handle Victoria. You're all taking a huge risk helping me, she said quietly. If this goes wrong. We're already at risk, Sophia interrupted, her young voice surprisingly firm. Every day in this house, we're at risk. At least this way, we're fighting back with dignity instead of just enduring. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. I've managed this household for 12 years. I've watched good people leave broken. Maybe it's time someone reminded Mrs. Whitmore that power isn't the same thing as respect. The conspiracy formed in that kitchen as the sun rose over the estate. They scattered to their duties, but now there was a current of purpose running through the mansion, invisible but electric. For the first time in years, the staff moved with something other than fear. At noon, Victoria summoned Elena to the formal drawing room. The billionaire's wife sat in a high-back chair like a queen on a throne, her designer dress probably worth more than Elena made in a year. Her red lips curved in anticipation of victory. Elena, I wanted to check on your progress. Given the adjusted timeline, I imagine you're struggling. Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, everything is on schedule. Elena kept her voice respectful but confident. The silver is complete and displayed. If you'd like to inspect it, I'm happy to show you now. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Disappointment quickly masked. I see. And the table settings. The team is completing those now, using the specifications you provided with some additional touches that we believe will enhance the overall aesthetic. Additional touches. Victoria's voice sharpened. I don't recall authorizing changes. Not changes, ma'am. Enhancements. Subtle details that honor your vision while elevating the execution. Of course, if you prefer the exact original plan with no improvements, we can certainly. Let me see. Victoria stood abruptly. Now. Elena led her through the mansion to the grand ballroom. The transformation was already underway. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light, casting prismatic shadows across walls draped in ivory and gold. The tables were arranged in perfect symmetry, each one dressed with linens so white they seemed to glow. But it was the details that made Victoria pause. Each centerpiece featured orchids, Victoria's favorite, but arranged not in the typical formal clusters, but in flowing, organic designs that suggested both elegance and warmth. The place cards bore quotes from humanitarian leaders, subtly reminding guests of the evening's charitable purpose. And in the center of it all, on a pedestal, sat a book for guest signatures. Not the pretentious thing Victoria had ordered, but a simple, beautiful leather volume embossed with gold lettering. An evening of grace and giving. Victoria walked slowly through the room, and Elena could see her searching desperately for something to criticize. But there was nothing. It was flawless. More than flawless, it was inspired. Who authorized these changes? Victoria demanded, her voice tight. No changes were made to your core vision, Mrs. Whitmore. We simply interpreted your instructions with care and artistry. If anything displeases you, we'll adjust it immediately. It was a masterful trap. To complain now would be to admit that the improvements were, in fact, improvements, that her original plan had been lacking. To demand changes would be to risk making things worse on such a tight timeline. Victoria was cornered by her own perfectionism. The orchids are acceptable, she said finally, the words dragged from her throat. But if anything goes wrong tonight, Elena, you'll be held responsible. I understand, ma'am. That's only fair. As Victoria swept from the room, Elena released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Maria emerged from behind a serving station, eyes wide. That was extraordinary, the older woman whispered. You gave her exactly what she wanted, but in a way that serves goodness instead of vanity. The night's not over yet, Elena warned. She'll be looking for mistakes. We have to be perfect. The next 8 hours were a blur of activity. The staff moved with synchronized precision, each person committed not just to their own tasks, but to the collective goal. Chenwei's kitchen produced miracles, courses that looked like art and tasted like heaven. Thomas drilled the serving staff until they moved like a ballet. Sophia, despite her injured hands, insisted on helping with final touches. And through it all, Elena coordinated, encouraged, and quietly ensured that every element aligned with a singular vision. An evening that celebrated generosity, community, and human dignity. Alexander appeared in the ballroom around 5 p.m., and Elena watched his face transform as he took in the scene. He found her adjusting the lighting near the stage where the charity auction would take place. This is incredible, he said softly. This is what I imagined when I proposed this event 3 years ago. Before Victoria took it over and made it about social positioning. It's still her event, Elena said. We just remembered why charity galas exist in the first place. Alexander turned to her, and there was something in his expression that made Elena's breath catch. You did this in less than 24 hours. We did this. Your entire staff did this. They're not afraid or broken, Mr. Whitmore. They're talented and caring. They just needed permission to show it. Before Alexander could respond, Victoria's voice echoed through the ballroom. Why is the lighting so warm? It should be cooler, more sophisticated. Elena watched Alexander's expression shift into that careful neutrality she'd learned to recognize. He started to turn away, to let Victoria's complaint go unchallenged. But then he stopped. The lighting is perfect, Alexander said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. It makes the room feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Our guests will feel at home here. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. Since when do you have opinions about decor? Since I remembered that this event is supposed to make people want to donate to children's hospitals, not prove how sophisticated we are. His voice was gentle but firm. Elena and the team have done exceptional work. I think we should trust their judgment. The ballroom had gone silent. Staff members froze in place, witnesses to something unprecedented. Alexander Whitmore publicly disagreeing with his wife. Not cruelly, not dismissively, but standing his ground nonetheless. Victoria's face flushed with anger, but she was trapped. Guests would arrive in 2 hours. The room was undeniably beautiful, and her husband had just given his approval in front of the staff. Fine, she bit out. But if this evening is anything less than perfect, there will be consequences. She turned and left, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. The moment she was gone, the staff released a collective breath. Thomas caught Elena's eye and gave a small, almost invisible nod of approval. Alexander approached Elena again. I probably just made your life harder. You stood up for what was right, Elena said. That's never wrong, even when it's hard. I should have done it years ago. He looked around the ballroom, at the staff who were trying not to obviously stare. I let fear turn me into someone I don't recognize. Someone who stays silent when silence is cruelty. Then don't be that person anymore, Elena said simply. Starting tonight. He held her gaze for a long moment, and Elena saw something shift in his eyes. A decision being made, a line being drawn. You're right. Starting tonight. As the first guests began arriving at 7 p.m., the Whitmore mansion glowed like a jewel. Music drifted from the ballroom, elegant and warm. The scent of orchids and catered delicacies filled the air. And in the center of it all, the staff moved with quiet confidence, executing a vision of grace that had nothing to do with showing off and everything to do with showing up for each other. Victoria greeted her guests with icy perfection, accepting compliments on the decor with possessive pleasure. But Elena noticed how Alexander moved through the crowd, not as Victoria's shadow, but as his own man, speaking with genuine passion about the children's hospital they were supporting, asking guests about their own charitable work, making the evening about something larger than social climbing. And when Mrs. Eleanor Hartwick, the grande dame of the city's old money families, took Victoria aside and said in her carrying voice, "My dear, this is the finest charity gala I've attended in 20 years. You've finally learned what true elegance means, not intimidating people, but welcoming them." Elena saw Victoria's smile freeze on her face. Because they both knew Victoria hadn't learned that lesson. Elena and the staff had taught in spite of her, not because of her. The evening was a triumph. The charity auction raised 3 times the expected amount. Guests lingered long past the scheduled end time, reluctant to leave the warmth and beauty of the event. And when the last guest departed at midnight, praising the new spirit of the Whitmore household, Victoria stood in the center of her perfect ballroom and realized she'd been outmaneuvered. She tried to create an impossible task to break the new Maid. Instead, the impossible task had revealed just how much power she'd wasted on cruelty, and how much good could flourish when people worked together with purpose instead of fear. Elena stood in the kitchen with the exhausted but happy staff, accepting hugs and quiet words of thanks. Through the doorway, she could see Alexander speaking with his wife, his posture no longer submissive but straight and sure. Something had changed in the Whitmore mansion tonight. The impossible had become possible. And the real challenge, rebuilding a household on foundations of respect instead of fear, was only just beginning. The morning after the gala, Elena expected retribution. She'd learned enough about Victoria Whitmore to know that public success without permission would be interpreted as personal betrayal. But when she arrived in the kitchen at 6 a.m., she found something unexpected: silence. Not the terrified silence that usually permeated the mansion, but a watchful, waiting silence. The staff moved through their morning routines with nervous energy, glancing at doorways as if expecting a storm to break at any moment. "She hasn't come down yet," Maria whispered, kneading dough with unusual force. "That's either very good or very, very bad." It turned out to be both. At 10 a.m., Mrs. Chun summoned Elena to Victoria's private sitting room. The space was decorated in cold whites and silvers, expensive and utterly impersonal, like a room in a luxury hotel where no one actually lived. Victoria sat by the window, her posture rigid, her face carefully composed. "Close the door," she said without looking at Elena. Elena obeyed, her heart steady despite the obvious danger. Whatever came next, she'd faced at the moment. She'd chosen kindness over compliance. "That was quite a performance last night," Victoria began, her voice deceptively light. The guests couldn't stop praising the transformation of our household. "Mrs. Hartwick actually took me aside to compliment our new warmth, as if this mansion had somehow been cold before." Elena remained silent, waiting. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Victoria turned finally, and Elena saw something unexpected in her eyes. Not just anger, but fear. "You come into my house, my domain, and within a week you've turned my own staff against me, manipulated my husband into contradicting me publicly, and made me look like some kind of tyrant who needed to be civilized. That wasn't my intention, Mrs. Whitmore. Wasn't it?" Victoria stood, moving closer. "Let me tell you something about intentions, Elena. I came from nothing. My father was a janitor. My mother cleaned houses just like you do. I wore secondhand clothes and ate free lunch at school while girls like Eleanor Hartwick looked at me like I was trash." The vulnerability in Victoria's voice was jarring, a crack in the perfect armor. Elena said nothing, understanding that this moment required listening. "I married Alexander because I loved him," Victoria continued, her voice raw. "But I also married him because I thought it would finally mean something, that I would finally matter. Instead, I spent my first year at charity luncheons with women who whispered about Alexander's little project, at country clubs where the membership committee made me wait 6 months to join, even though I was married to one of the richest men in the state." "So you decided to become what they were," Elena said softly. "To treat others the way you've been treated." Victoria's jaw clenched. "I decided to be strong, to never let anyone look down on me again. But that's not strength, Mrs. Whitmore. That's fear wearing strength's clothes." The slap came so fast Elena barely registered it before the sting bloomed across her cheek. She raised her hand to her face, more shocked than hurt, and met Victoria's eyes. The other woman was shaking, tears running down her perfectly made-up face. "Get out," Victoria whispered. "Pack your things. You're fired." Elena didn't move. "No. Excuse me." I said no. Elena's voice was gentle but immovable. "You can slap me. You can scream at me. You can make my life here miserable. But I won't leave, because leaving means abandoning people like Sophia and Maria and Thomas who deserve better than to be collateral damage in your war with your own past. This is my house." Victoria's voice broke. "I decide who stays and who goes." "Actually," came Alexander's voice from the doorway, "we decide that. Together." Both women turned to find him standing there, his face carved with determination and something that looked like grief. He'd clearly heard everything. The confession, the slap, the ultimatum. "How long have you been there?" Victoria demanded. "Long enough." He entered the room, and Elena noticed how carefully he positioned himself between his wife and herself. Protective, but not aggressive. "Victoria, we need to talk. Privately." "Elena, please wait outside." Elena nodded and slipped from the room, but not before seeing the expression on Victoria's face. Raw terror mixed with defiance, like a cornered animal that knows the trap is closing but isn't ready to stop fighting. She stood in the hallway, her cheeks still stinging, and listened to the rise and fall of voices through the door. She couldn't make out words, but she heard Alexander's voice, steady and low. She heard Victoria's voice, sharp at first, then breaking into something that sounded like sobbing. The conversation lasted an hour. When the door finally opened, Alexander emerged first. His eyes were red-rimmed, but clear. Elena, I apologize for what my wife did. Striking an employee is unacceptable, and I want you to know there will be consequences. Sir, I don't want. Not those kind of consequences. He gave her a tired smile. I mean consequences for our marriage. For how we run this household. For all the things I've let slide for too long. He paused. Victoria has agreed to take some time away. A month with her sister in California. And when she returns, things are going to be different. Is she all right? Elena asked, surprising herself with the concern in her voice. No, she's not all right. She hasn't been all right for a long time. I've been too blind or too cowardly to see it. Alexander rubbed his face. But she's agreed to talk to someone, a therapist, and to really examine how she's been treating people. From inside the sitting room, Elena heard quiet crying. She looked at Alexander. May I speak with her? Just for a moment. He looked surprised but nodded. If she's willing. Elena entered to find Victoria still by the window, her makeup ruined, her perfect facade crumbled. She looked younger without all the armor, and infinitely more human. I don't want your pity, Victoria said without turning. I'm not here to pity you. Elena sat in the chair across from her. I'm here because I understand something about you now that I didn't before. What's that? That hurt people. But also that healing is possible if you're brave enough to want it. Victoria turned finally, her eyes searching Elena's face. Why don't you hate me? After everything I've done, everything I was about to do, you should hate me. Because hating you would mean believing you can't change. And I don't believe that about anyone. Elena leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, Victoria, you're not the villain in this story. You're just someone who got lost. The question is whether you want to find your way back. To what? To being looked down on? To being nobody? To being human? Elena said simply. To being the woman Alexander fell in love with. To being the person you were before the world taught you that cruelty was the only defense against being hurt. Victoria stared at her for a long moment, and Elena saw the war happening behind her eyes. Pride versus vulnerability. Fear versus hope. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I remember how to be kind. Then learn, Elena said, the same way you learn to be cruel. One choice at a time, one moment at a time. And when you fail, because you will fail, we all do, you try again. That's all any of us can do. They sat in silence for a while, two women from vastly different worlds who'd somehow arrived at the same crossroads. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. Finally, Victoria asked, will you stay? While I'm gone, will you help Alexander keep the household running? I know I have no right to ask after. I'll stay, Elena interrupted. Not for you. For the staff. For Sophia and Maria and everyone else who deserves to work without fear. But when you come back, if you come back to old patterns, I won't be silent about it. Victoria almost smiled. I wouldn't expect you to be. She stood, gathering her composure like armor, but lighter this time. I need to pack. My flight leaves this afternoon. As Elena left the sitting room, she found Alexander waiting in the hallway, his expression hopeful and terrified in equal measure. What did you say to her? The truth. That healing is possible if she wants it. Do you think she wants it? Elena considered the question carefully. I think she's scared of wanting it. But scared people can still be brave. We'll have to wait and see. The news of Victoria's departure spread through the household with the speed of wildfire. The staff's reactions ranged from relief to disbelief to cautious optimism. That afternoon, as Victoria's car pulled away from the mansion, Elena stood with Maria on the servants' porch, watching. What happens now? Maria asked. Now we show Mr. Whitmore what this household can be when it runs on respect instead of fear, Elena said. And when Mrs. Whitmore returns, we hope she's ready to be part of that instead of fighting against it. And if she's not? Elena smiled, thinking of Alexander's firm voice in the sitting room, of the line he'd finally drawn. Then Mr. Whitmore has already shown he's ready to make hard choices. The question was never about his love, it was about his courage. And I think he's finding that again. That evening, Alexander called a household meeting in the staff dining room, something that had never happened in the 7 years of his marriage. The entire staff gathered, nervous and uncertain, as their employer stood before them without his usual protective distance. I owe you all an apology, he began. For years, I've watched as my wife created an environment of fear in our home. I did nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace, protecting you all from worse. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from discomfort, from confrontation, from having to choose between my marriage and my values. He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. Elena taught me something important this week. She taught me that silence in the face of cruelty isn't kindness, it's cowardice. And that good intentions mean nothing without the courage to act on them. Starting today, things change. You will all be treated with the respect and dignity you deserve. Your voices matter. Your well-being matters. And if anyone treats you poorly, I want to know about it. No retaliation. No fear. Just accountability. Thomas raised his hand tentatively. Sir, what about when Mrs. Whitmore returns? Alexander's expression was sad but resolute. When Victoria returns, she'll either be part of this new household culture, or she'll find that there are consequences for choosing cruelty over compassion. I love my wife, but I won't let that love be an excuse for tolerating abuse. The meeting ended with something unprecedented. Applause. Quiet at first, then building, as the staff realized they were witnessing not just a promise, but a transformation. Later that night, Elena found Alexander in his study, staring at a photo on his desk. His wedding photo, showing him and Victoria young and genuinely happy, before wealth and social pressure had twisted something beautiful into something toxic. Do you think she can change? He asked without looking up. Elena thought about Victoria's tears, her confession, her fear. I think change is always possible, but it requires wanting something different more than you want to protect yourself from being hurt. The question is what Victoria wants more. And if she can't change, if she comes back and falls into old patterns, then you'll have to make a choice, Elena said gently. Between the woman you loved and the person she's become. Between hope and reality. Those are never easy choices. No, Alexander agreed. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the right choices aren't supposed to be easy. Maybe that's how you know they're right. He turned to face her, and Elena was struck by how young he looked despite his billions and his burdens. How did you get so wise at 24? I'm not wise, Elena said with a small smile. I've just learned that kindness is worth fighting for, even when it costs you something. Especially when it costs you something. It cost you a slap in the face today, and it cost you the comfortable illusion that you could keep everyone safe without making hard choices. I think we both paid prices worth paying. Alexander laughed, surprised and genuine. You're remarkable, you know that. I'm just a maid who doesn't believe in being quiet when quiet means someone gets hurt. No, Alexander said, his voice serious. You're someone who remembered what I've forgotten. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to do what's right even when you're terrified, even when the cost is high. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who'd found unexpected understanding across the divide of wealth and position. Outside, the stars wheeled through the night sky, indifferent to human struggles. But inside the Whitmore mansion, something fragile and precious was taking root. The possibility of change, watered by courage and tended by hope. The next month would be a test. For Victoria in California, for Alexander and his newly conscious household, for Elena and the staff as they navigated this strange new territory where kindness wasn't punished and voices mattered. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, the Whitmore mansion felt like a home instead of battlefield. And that, Elena thought, was worth every risk she'd taken, worth every price she might still have to pay. The month of Victoria's absence transformed the Whitmore mansion in ways both visible and subtle. The changes began small, staff members speaking without whispers, laughter echoing through hallways that had known only tense silence, the gradual relaxation of shoulders that had been perpetually hunched in anticipation of criticism. But the deeper transformations were happening in individual hearts. Sophia's hands healed, and with them, her confidence. She began suggesting improvements to the housekeeping routines, her natural organizational skills finally given room to flourish. Maria taught cooking classes in the evenings, sharing recipes from her grandmother with younger staff members who gathered around the kitchen island like students at a beloved teacher's feet. Thomas started wearing ties he actually liked instead of the severe black ones Victoria had insisted upon. And Alexander emerged from his study, Elena watched this transformation with a mixture of hope and concern. The billionaire who'd hidden in work and solitude now walked his own halls, asking questions, learning names of staff members' children, joining the household for coffee in the morning. He was rediscovering his own home and, it seemed, rediscovering himself. But Elena also noticed the lines around his eyes deepening, the way his hand sometimes strayed to his phone before he stopped himself from calling California. Love, even love for someone toxic, didn't evaporate just because you recognized its cost. 2 weeks into Victoria's absence, Elena found Alexander on the terrace at midnight, staring at the stars with a glass of untouched whiskey beside him. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He didn't seem surprised by her presence. "I keep thinking about what you said, about choices and courage. But the truth is, Elena, I'm terrified. What if Victoria comes back unchanged? What if I have to choose between my marriage and my values? What if I'm not strong enough to make that choice?" Elena sat in the chair beside him. "Can I tell you a story? Please." "When I was 16, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. We were poor. I mean really poor. The kind where you choose between electricity and groceries. My father worked 3 jobs, but it wasn't enough." She paused, the memory still sharp after 8 years. "A wealthy family in our neighborhood heard about our situation. They offered to pay for my mother's treatment, all of it, but there was a condition. I had to drop out of school and work as their live-in maid. Essentially, they bought me." Alexander's expression shifted to horror, but Elena continued. "For 2 years, I cleaned their house, cooked their meals, and endured their eldest son's inappropriate comments and their daughter's casual cruelty. I was miserable, but my mother lived, and that's what mattered. What happened? My mother found out. She thought the family had just been generous, that I was working there to save for college. When she learned the truth, that I'd sold myself to save her, she was devastated. She wanted me to leave immediately, said no life was worth that kind of sacrifice." Elena smiled at the memory. "We had the worst fight of our lives. She said I'd given up my dreams. I said she was my dream, that nothing else mattered. She said that was exactly the problem, that love shouldn't cost you your dignity, your future, your sense of self. She was right," Alexander said quietly. "She was. But she was also wrong, because sometimes love does cost those things. The question isn't whether we should protect ourselves from the cost. It's whether the love is worth it, and whether the person we love would want us to pay that price." Elena turned to face him fully. "Victoria loved you once, before fear and insecurity twisted that love into something possessive and cruel. But that woman you married, she wouldn't want you to sacrifice your values, your staff's well-being, and your own peace of mind to stay married to who she's become. That woman would want you to love her enough to draw the line. What if drawing the line means losing her? Then you lose her, and you grieve, and eventually you heal." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "But at least you don't lose yourself in the process. And maybe, losing you is what finally makes her want to change for real, not just out of fear of consequences." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "What happened with your mother?" "She beat the cancer. 5 years in remission now. And I finished school. Took longer, but I did it. The wealthy family, their daughter, is actually a friend now. Turns out she was performing cruelty because she thought that's what power looked like. When I left, when I drew that line, it made her question everything. She's a social worker now, helps families like mine navigate medical debt. So the story has a happy ending. The story has a real ending," Elena corrected. "Some relationships survived, some didn't. Some people changed, others didn't. But everyone had to decide who they wanted to be when the comfortable lies were stripped away. That's what you're facing now." Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. "It's Victoria. She wants to video chat." Elena stood. "I'll give you privacy." "No. Stay. Please." He looked almost panicked. I need someone here who'll remind me to be honest." The video call connected, and Victoria's face filled the screen. She looked different, softer somehow, without the armor of perfect makeup and styled hair. She wore a simple sweater, and her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "Hello, Alexander." "Elena." She'd noticed Elena in the background and didn't seem surprised. "I'm glad you're there. Actually, Elena, you deserve to hear this too." Victoria, you don't have to, Alexander began. Yes, I do. Victoria's voice was steady but vulnerable. I've spent the last 2 weeks in intensive therapy. For hours a day, sometimes more. Do you know what I learned? That I'm an asshole. Despite everything, Alexander almost smiled. That's not. No, let me finish. I learned that I'm an asshole who's been running from poverty and powerlessness for so long that I forgot there were other ways to feel safe. I learned that I turned my staff into targets because I was terrified someone would discover I was still that janitor's daughter underneath the designer clothes. I learned that I nearly destroyed the only truly good thing in my life, your love, because I was too scared to believe I deserved it. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her voice didn't waver. I slapped Elena. I terrorized Sophia until she bled. I made Maria, who's been nothing but kind to me, afraid to speak in her own workplace. I turned her home into a prison where I was both the warden and the inmate. Victoria. Alexander's voice broke. I called because I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. I don't know if I can change. God, Alexander, I want to so badly. But wanting isn't the same as doing. And if I come back and fall into old patterns, if I hurt people again because it feels safer than being vulnerable, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to leave me. The words came out raw and painful. I need you to love me enough to walk away if I can't become the person you deserve. The person I used to be. The person I could be again if I'm brave enough. Alexander was crying now, silent tears running down his face. Elena felt her own eyes burning, witnessing this moment of terrible, beautiful honesty. I love you, Victoria continued. I love you enough to say that you deserve better than who I've been. And if I can't give you better, then you need to find it elsewhere. Promise me, Alexander. Promise me you'll choose your values over your vows if it comes to that. Victoria, I don't want to lose you. Then help me not lose myself. She smiled through her tears. I have 2 more weeks here. My therapist thinks I need a slower reintegration. Maybe start with visits, see how I handle the pressure, whether the old patterns resurface. Would that be okay? Of course. Whatever you need. And Elena? Victoria looked directly at the young woman who'd sparked this entire transformation. Thank you. For refusing to be silent. For standing up when it cost you something. For treating me like I could be better instead of accepting that I was just this broken, cruel thing. You saved my life by refusing to participate in my self-destruction. Elena's voice was thick with emotion. I just believed what I saw in you that day in your sitting room. Someone who was scared and hurting and lost. Someone worth fighting for. After the call ended, Alexander sat in stunned silence. Elena moved to leave, to give him space to process, but he caught her hand. Stay, he said. Just stay. I don't want to be alone right now. So they sat together on the terrace as the night deepened around them. 2 people who'd found unexpected friendship in the wreckage of a breaking household. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Sometimes presence is enough. Eventually, Alexander spoke. When my father died, he told me something I didn't understand at the time. He said, success is easy, Alex. You're smart enough and driven enough to make money, build businesses, accumulate wealth. But actually living well, with integrity and kindness and courage, that's the hard part. That's where most people fail, including me. He sounded wise. But he was also warning me. He built his fortune ruthlessly, stepped on people, prioritized profit over humanity. He had regrets at the end, but by then it was too late to fix most of the damage. Alexander looked at Elena. I don't want to have those regrets. I don't want to wake up at 70 and realize I spent my life being rich, but never being good. Then don't, Elena said simply. You have something your father didn't, awareness while you still have time to change course. Use it. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo of healing and uncertainty. Victoria called every few days, and Elena noticed the gradual change in these conversations. The defensiveness faded. The need to control, to dictate, to dominate. It softened into something more like genuine dialogue. But Elena also noticed Alexander's growing anxiety as Victoria's return date approached. Despite the positive signs, despite the therapy and the promises, there was no guarantee. Change was never a straight line, and trauma, whether inflicted or endured, left scars that took more than a month to heal. 3 days before Victoria's scheduled return, Sophia approached Elena in the laundry room. The young woman looked nervous but determined. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said. "What if Mrs. Whitmore comes back and nothing's really changed? What if it was all just words to make us let our guard down?" It was a fair question, and one Elena had been asking herself. "Then we'll know, and we'll respond accordingly." "But Sophia, whether Victoria changes or not, we've changed. You found your voice. Maria's teaching again. Thomas wears colorful ties. We've remembered what it feels like to work without fear. But if she tries to take that away again, then we don't let her." Together, Elena squeezed Sophia's hand. "The difference between now and before isn't just about Victoria. It's about us, about Mr. Whitmore, about knowing that silence is a choice, and we can make a different choice." The day before Victoria's return, Alexander gathered the staff one final time. They assembled in the same dining room where he'd promised change a month ago, and Elena could see the question in everyone's eyes. Would those promises survive Victoria's return? "Tomorrow, my wife comes home," Alexander began. "She's done important work in therapy, and I believe she truly wants to change. But I also know that wanting and doing are different things, and that old patterns have deep roots." He looked around the room, his gaze settling on each face. "So, I'm making you a promise. If Victoria falls back into cruelty, there will be immediate consequences. Not threats, not warnings, actual consequences. Her return is conditional on her behavior, and if she can't meet those conditions, then she won't remain in this household, even if that means our marriage ends." The room erupted in murmurs. This was more than anyone had expected. Alexander was drawing a line in permanent marker, not pencil. "I know this is a lot to process," he continued, "and I know some of you are skeptical. You have every right to be. But I'm asking you to give us, a chance. Not blind trust, not naive hope, just a chance to prove that change is possible." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She wandered the mansion's halls, remembering her first week here. The fear, the tension, the toxic atmosphere that had permeated every corner. So much had shifted, but the real test was coming. She found herself in the ballroom where the charity gala had taken place. The room was empty now, furniture stored away, but she could still see it as it had been that night, filled with light and laughter and the quiet satisfaction of good work done well. Nervous, Alexander's voice came from the doorway. Terrified, Elena admitted. "What if this all falls apart tomorrow? What if I've helped you build hope on a foundation that won't hold? Then we'll rebuild, again and again if necessary." He joined her in the center of the empty ballroom. "But Elena, even if Victoria can't change, even if tomorrow is a disaster, you didn't build hope on a false foundation. You reminded me who I wanted to be. You showed the staff that their voices matter. Those things don't disappear just because one person can't heal." "I really want her to heal," Elena said softly. "Despite everything she did, I want her to find her way back." "Me too. God, me too." Alexander's voice cracked. "But I'm finally ready to accept that I can't want it enough for both of us. She has to choose it. Every day, every moment, she has to choose being better over being safe." They stood together in the empty ballroom, on the eve of truth, and Elena thought about all the forces that had brought them to this moment. Cruelty and courage, fear and faith, the way broken systems perpetuated themselves until someone loved people enough to demand better. Tomorrow, Victoria Whitmore would walk through the front door of her mansion, and everything, all the growth, all the healing, all the hard-won changes, would face its greatest test. But tonight, Elena allowed herself to hope. Because if she'd learned anything in her 24 years, it was that hope wasn't naive optimism. Hope was the stubborn refusal to let cruelty have the final word. Hope was the belief that people could surprise you, that healing was possible, that kindness could be stronger than fear if enough people were brave enough to choose it. Tomorrow would tell whether that hope was justified. But tonight, in the empty ballroom where impossible tasks had become possible, Elena let herself believe in the transformative power of truth, courage, and second chances. The house slept around them, peaceful for perhaps the first time in 7 years. And in that peace, something fragile and precious waited to be born. Not perfection, but possibility. Not certainty, but the chance to try. Sometimes, that's all anyone can ask for. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, that's enough. Victoria Whitmore's car pulled up to the mansion at exactly 2 p.m., as scheduled. Elena watched from the second-floor window, her heart pounding as the driver opened the door and Victoria stepped out. The woman who emerged looked different from the one who'd left a month ago. She wore jeans. Elena had never seen her in anything but designer dresses and suits, and a simple blue sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, not styled in its usual severe perfection. She stood for a long moment, staring up at the mansion that had been both her palace and her prison, and even from a distance, Elena could see her chest rising and falling with deep, steadying breaths. Alexander met her at the door. Elena couldn't hear their words, but she saw them embrace, tentatively at first, then tighter. Victoria's face pressed against his shoulder for a long moment. When they pulled apart, Victoria's cheeks were wet with tears. The staff had gathered in the kitchen, trying to look busy but clearly waiting. Mrs. Chun had positioned herself near the door, ready to intervene if necessary. Thomas stood by the silver cabinet, his posture protective. Maria kneaded dough that didn't need kneading. Sophia clutched a dustcloth like a shield. Elena made her way downstairs, knowing that whatever happened next, she needed to be present. She found Victoria and Alexander in the entrance hall, Victoria's single suitcase sitting at her feet, a stark contrast to the 8 pieces of designer luggage she'd left with. "Elena," Victoria said, her voice uncertain. Would you be willing to talk? Just for a few minutes." Elena nodded, and they moved to the small morning room off the entrance hall. Alexander started to follow, but Victoria stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "I need to do this alone. Is that okay?" He nodded, though worry creased his face. In the morning room, Victoria sat on the edge of a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Elena sat across from her, waiting. "I've been rehearsing this conversation for a week," Victoria began. "Practicing what I'd say, how I'd say it. But now that I'm here, all those practiced words feel hollow." She looked up, meeting Elena's eyes. "So, I'm just going to be honest. Is that all right? Please. I'm scared out of my mind." The words rushed out. "I'm scared that I'll walk through this house and see all the people I've hurt, and I'll feel defensive instead of sorry. I'm scared that when someone makes a mistake, because people make mistakes, my first instinct will be to lash out instead of respond with grace. I'm scared that all the work I've done, all the insights I've gained, will evaporate the moment I feel threatened or insecure." Victoria's voice broke. "I'm scared that I can't actually change, that I'm fundamentally broken in some way that therapy can't fix. And I'm scared that Alexander and all of you have built hope around my return, and I'm going to shatter it and hurt everyone all over again." "Those are reasonable fears," Elena said gently. "Are they? Or are they excuses I'm making in advance for inevitable failure?" "Maybe both." Elena leaned forward. "Victoria, can I ask you something? In therapy, did you ever figure out exactly when you changed? When you went from the woman Alexander fell in love with to the person who slapped me in your sitting room?" Victoria thought for a long moment. "It wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small choices. 1,000 times I chose protecting myself over being vulnerable. 1,000 times I chose power over connection because power felt safer. So changing back won't be one moment either," Elena said. "It'll be 1,000 small choices in the other direction. And yes, you'll fail sometimes. You'll have moments where fear wins, and you say something cruel or controlling. That's not the question. Then what is? The question is, what do you do after you fail? Do you justify it, blame others, convince yourself it was necessary? Or do you acknowledge it, apologize sincerely, and make a different choice next time?" Elena's voice was firm but kind. "That's the only thing that actually matters. Not perfection, not never failing. Just whether you're committed to choosing better, again and again, even when it's hard." Victoria wiped her eyes. "Will you help me? Will you tell me when I'm slipping? I know I have no right to ask." "You don't," Elena agreed. "But I'll do it anyway. Not for you. For the staff who deserve better. For Alexander who loves you. And honestly, for the woman you used to be, who's still in there somewhere, buried under years of fear and self-protection. I don't know if I deserve that kind of grace." "None of us deserve grace," Elena said. "That's what makes it grace. The question is whether you'll accept it and use it to become better, or reject it, because accepting it means acknowledging you need a change. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of truth settling between them like a presence. "There's something I need to do," Victoria said finally. "Will you gather the staff?" In the kitchen. 5 minutes later, the Whitmore household staff stood assembled in the kitchen, their faces a mixture of hope, skepticism, and barely concealed fear. Victoria stood before them, looking smaller than Elena had ever seen her, not physically, but in presence. All the imperious authority had been stripped away, leaving just a woman who'd hurt people and needed to make amends. "I know I don't have a right to ask for your attention," Victoria began, her voice shaking slightly. "But I'm asking anyway, because I need to say things that should have been said a long time ago, and I need to say them to your faces, not through an intermediary or a memo." She took a deep breath. "For 7 years, I've treated you like you were less than human. I've yelled at you, belittled you, threatened you, and created an environment where you came to work every day afraid. I told myself I was maintaining standards, that I was just being demanding because excellence required it. But that was a lie. I was being cruel because cruelty made me feel powerful, and feeling powerful made me feel safe." Maria made a small sound, not quite a gasp, but close. Sophia's eyes were wide. Thomas stood very still, waiting. "I want to apologize to each of you specifically, because each of you suffered in specific ways because of my fear and insecurity." Victoria turned to Sophia. "Sophia, I made you polish 300 pieces of silver with bleeding hands because I wanted to break you. I saw that you were young and confident, and it threatened me because I remember being young and powerless. I'm deeply, profoundly sorry." Sophia's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. Victoria moved to Maria. "Maria, you've been with this household since before I arrived. You have decades of experience and wisdom, and I treated you like you were replaceable because I was terrified you'd see through me, that you'd recognize I was just a janitor's daughter playing dress-up. I'm so sorry for all the times I made you feel small so I could feel big." Maria was openly crying now, her weathered hands covering her face. One by one, Victoria went through the staff, naming specific cruelties, acknowledging specific harms. To Thomas, for emasculating him in front of guests. To Chun Wei, for crushing his culinary creativity. To Mrs. Chun, for putting her in an impossible position between protecting her staff and protecting her job. To the housemaids, the gardeners, the drivers, everyone who'd suffered under her reign of fear. When she was done, Victoria's face was streaked with tears and her voice was raw. "I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back 7 years of peace you should have had. But I can promise you this. I'm committed to changing. Not perfectly, not immediately, but consistently, genuinely, with the help of therapy and the support of people who'll hold me accountable." She paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. "I'm also giving each of you a choice. If you want to leave, if working here after everything I've done is too painful or too risky, I've asked Alexander to provide full severance packages and glowing references. You won't be punished for choosing your own well-being over giving me another chance. You don't owe me your forgiveness or your trust." The kitchen was silent except for the sound of quiet crying. Elena watched faces process this offering, this acknowledgement that they had agency, that their choices mattered. Finally, Maria spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've worked in this house for 15 years. I watched you arrive as a bride, hopeful and kind. I watched you change into someone I didn't recognize. And now I'm watching you take the hardest step anyone can take, admitting you were wrong and asking for help." She wiped her eyes. "I don't know if you can change, but I know Mr. Alex is a good man, and Elena has shown us what courage looks like, and I believe in second chances. So I'm staying. For now." One by one, others echoed similar sentiments. Not blind trust, not naive forgiveness, but a cautious willingness to see if change was possible. Only one person remained silent. Thomas. The butler stood against the far wall, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate your apology. Truly. But words are easy when you're scared of consequences. I need to see actions, consistently, over time. So I'm giving you 3 months. If at the end of 3 months I see real change, I'll stay. If not, I'll take the severance and leave with my dignity intact. Is that acceptable?" Victoria nodded, a small smile touching her lips. That's more than fair, Thomas. Thank you for being honest. The meeting ended with an atmosphere Elena could only describe as cautiously hopeful. People dispersed to their duties, and Victoria stood alone in the kitchen for a moment, looking vulnerable and exhausted. That was incredibly brave, Elena said softly. That was terrifying, Victoria corrected. But necessary. My therapist says that accountability has to be concrete and specific, not vague promises to do better. So, concrete and specific. She laughed weakly. Now I just have to follow through. The first test came 2 days later. Victoria had requested that dinners be more casual, family style, with her and Alexander eating in the smaller dining room instead of the formal room that seated 24. Maria was serving when a plate slipped from her hands, shattering on the marble floor. Elena, who'd been consulting with Mrs. Chen nearby, heard the crash and immediately tensed. Through the doorway, she watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions in rapid succession. Irritation, anger, the familiar urge to lash out. Everyone froze. But then Victoria closed her eyes, took a visible breath, and opened them again. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. Maria, are you all right? Did any of the pieces cut you? Maria stared at her, shocked. I know, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm so sorry. Plates break. It happens. Victoria stood, moving to help pick up pieces. Please be careful of the sharp edges. And Maria, thank you for all your years of service. I know I haven't said that enough, or at all, but I'm grateful. After Maria left to get cleaning supplies, Elena saw Victoria's hands shaking as she sat back down. Alexander reached across the table to squeeze her hand. That was hard, he said quietly. That was excruciating, Victoria admitted. Every instinct I have was screaming at me to say something cutting, something that would make her feel as small as I felt when I heard the crash. But I remember what my therapist said, between impulse and action is a space. In that space is your choice. So I chose. God, please tell me it gets easier. I don't know if it gets easier, Alexander said. But maybe it becomes who you are instead of who you're trying to be. That's the goal, anyway. Over the following weeks, Elena watched Victoria navigate the minefield of change. There were victories. The day she complimented Sophia's organization system instead of criticizing minor imperfections. The afternoon she sat with Mrs. Chun discussing household management as collaborators instead of monarch and subject. The evening she apologized to Chun Wei for interrupting him and asked to hear his full idea. But there were also failures. A sharp comment to a gardener about trimmed hedges that slipped out before Victoria caught herself. A moment of imperious tone with a housemaid that made the young woman flinch. Each time, Elena watched Victoria's face register horror at her own behavior. And each time, Victoria apologized. Not defensively, not with excuses, but with genuine remorse and commitment to do better. She's actually trying, Sophia said to Elena one evening, wonder in her voice. I didn't think people like her could change, but she's actually trying. The question is whether trying is enough, Thomas said, still skeptical. But Elena noticed that his posture around Victoria had relaxed slightly, his responses less defensive. 6 weeks into Victoria's return, Alexander asked Elena to join him and Victoria for coffee in the morning room. Elena's heart sank. Was she being let go? Had she overstepped somewhere? But when she entered, both of them were smiling. Elena, we have a proposition, Alexander began. Victoria and I have been talking about the future of this household. We want to fundamentally restructure how things operate, not just interpersonally, but structurally. We want to create something that resembles a cooperative rather than a traditional employer-employee dynamic. What does that mean? Elena asked carefully. Victoria leaned forward. It means profit sharing. It means decision-making power for senior staff. It means childcare assistance and education benefits and mental health support. It means treating everyone who works here as partners in maintaining a household, rather than servants who exist to make our lives easier. We've already consulted with lawyers about restructuring, Alexander added. It's complex but doable, and we want you to help design it. You've shown more leadership and moral clarity in 2 months than most people show in a lifetime. Will you help us build something better? Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I'm a maid. I have no training in You're someone who understands that dignity matters more than efficiency, Victoria interrupted. That kindness isn't weakness. That power should be used to lift people up, not keep them down. Those aren't skills you learn in business school. Those are values you either have or you don't. And you have them. So, Alexander smiled. What do you say? Elena looked at these two people, one who'd rediscovered his courage, one who was fighting every day to become someone worthy of that courage, and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just about one household anymore. This was about creating a model that proved wealth and decency weren't mutually exclusive, that privilege could be wielded with grace. I say yes, she said softly, but on one condition. Name it, Victoria said. The staff has to agree. Not just accept it from above, but actively participate in designing it. Their voices matter as much as ours. Maybe more, since they're the ones who've lived through the old system. Alexander laughed. See? This is exactly why we need you. Yes. Absolutely yes. Over the next 3 months, the Whitmore household underwent a transformation that would eventually make headlines in industry publications and progressive wealth management circles. Staff meetings became forums for genuine dialogue. Wages increased significantly, along with benefits packages that supported whole lives, not just work duties. A council system emerged, with elected representatives from different household departments working alongside Alexander and Victoria to make major decisions. But the real change was more subtle and profound. It was in how Victoria greeted people in the morning, with genuine interest, not performative kindness. It was in how conflicts were resolved, through dialogue rather than decree. It was in the laughter that now regularly echoed through the halls, the sense that this was a place where people worked together rather than for someone. On the 3-month anniversary of Victoria's return, Thomas approached her in the hallway. Elena happened to be passing and paused, curious. Mrs. Whitmore, Thomas said formally, I wanted to tell you that I've decided to stay. You've earned that. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Thomas. That means more than you know. I'm not saying the past is forgotten, he continued, but I am saying that you've shown me change is possible, and that's something I needed to see. We all did. After he left, Victoria found Elena in the library. Thank you. For what? For refusing to let cruelty win. For believing I could be better when I didn't believe it myself. For standing up when standing up cost you something. Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. You saved my marriage. You saved my soul. And you saved this household from being a beautiful prison. I just chose kindness, Elena said softly. Everything else followed from that. No. Victoria shook her head. You chose courage. Kindness without courage is just nice thoughts. But kindness with courage, that changes the world. Or at least one household at a time. That evening, the entire household, family and staff together, those titles now feeling increasingly irrelevant, gathered for dinner in the grand dining room. Not a formal affair, but a communal meal celebrating their new structure, their new way of being together. As Elena looked around the table at faces that had once been haunted by fear but now glowed with cautious happiness, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The impossible task that became possible. The cruel woman who'd found her way back to kindness. The silent man who'd rediscovered his voice. The staff who'd learned they could stand together. I'd like to make a toast, Alexander said, raising his glass. To second chances. To the courage to change. And to the young woman who reminded us all that wealth means nothing if you build it on the backs of people's dignity. To Elena. To Elena. The table echoed, and in their voices Elena heard genuine affection, respect, and gratitude. But Elena raised her glass to them. To all of us. For choosing a hard thing. For believing better was possible. For proving that kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest force in the world when we have the courage to live by it. Later, as the evening wound down and people scattered to their various rooms, Elena stood in the entrance hall where she'd first witnessed Victoria's cruelty those months ago. The space looked the same, marble floors, crystal chandelier, fresh flowers on the hall table. But it felt completely different. A house wasn't just walls and furniture and wealth. A house was the accumulation of choices made within it, the energy of how people treated each other, the daily decisions between kindness and cruelty, courage and convenience, fear and love. The Whitmore mansion had been a beautiful prison. Now it was becoming something else, Not perfect, never perfect, but genuinely good. A place where mistakes were met with grace. Where people mattered more than possessions. Where wealth served compassion instead of ego. Victoria found her there. Two women who'd started as adversaries and become something like friends, standing in the space where everything had changed. I was thinking, Victoria said, about that day you started here. How terrified everyone was. How toxic everything had become. If you'd known then what you were walking into, would you still have taken the job? Elena considered the question seriously. Yes, because the toxicity wasn't the truth of this place. It was just what the place had become. And anything that becomes something can become something else, if enough people are willing to fight for it. Thank you, Victoria said simply, for seeing what we could become instead of just accepting what we were. Thank you for being brave enough to change, Elena countered. That's the hardest thing anyone can do. Admit they've been wrong and commit to being different. They stood together in comfortable silence, two women from vastly different worlds who'd both learned the same essential truth. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is choosing kindness, dignity, and justice even when fear tells you to choose self-protection instead. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, that choice doesn't just change one person or one household. Sometimes it changes everyone it touches, rippling outward in ways you never expected, proving that cruelty might be powerful, but love, real love, backed by courage and commitment, is stronger still. In the Whitmore mansion, nobody dared say a word to the billionaire's wife, until the new maid shocked everyone by refusing to be silent in the face of cruelty. And that refusal, that single act of courage, had transformed a house built on fear into a home built on grace. The revolution had been quiet. The transformation had been gradual. But the result was undeniable. Proof that people can change, that systems can be rebuilt, that kindness can win if enough people are willing to fight for it. And sometimes, that's the most shocking thing of all. 5 years later, Elena Martinez stood in the ballroom of the Whitmore mansion, now officially called Whitmore House, reflecting its evolution from private residence to model household, addressing a crowd of domestic workers, household managers, and wealth consultants from across the country. The Whitmore cooperative model had become famous. Articles in the New York Times, features on NPR, a documentary that had won awards. But more importantly, it had inspired dozens of other wealthy households to restructure, proving that ethical employment in private homes wasn't just idealistic. It was practical, sustainable, and deeply rewarding for everyone involved. Victoria sat in the front row, next to Alexander, both of them beaming with pride. They held hands like newlyweds, their marriage stronger now than it had been in its early days, built on honesty and mutual respect instead of social obligation and unexamined patterns. Around the room sat familiar faces. Maria, now the head of household operations and co-author of the best-selling book From Service to Partnership. Sophia, who'd completed her business degree while working at Whitmore House, and now consulted with other households on implementing cooperative structures. Thomas, still the butler, but also the head of the Workers' Council, his colorful ties legendary among household staff nationwide. 5 years ago, Elena said from the podium, I walked into a beautiful mansion that was rotting from the inside because cruelty had been allowed to flourish unchallenged. Today, I stand in a true home, built on foundations of mutual respect and shared purpose. This transformation didn't happen because one person was heroic. It happened because a group of people decided that kindness was worth fighting for, even when fighting was frightening. She looked at Victoria. It happened because a woman who'd forgotten who she was found the courage to remember. Because a man who'd been silent found his voice. Because a group of workers decided they deserved dignity and stood together to claim it. Elena smiled. The question we get asked most often is, can this really be replicated? Can other households actually change? And the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. If we could transform the Whitmore household from a place of fear to a place of grace, anyone can. It just requires courage, commitment, and the radical belief that every human being, regardless of their role or status, deserves to be treated with fundamental respect. The audience erupted in applause, and Elena thought about that terrified girl, bleeding hands, impossible tasks, and the choice she'd made to stand up instead of stay silent. Sometimes one voice is all it takes to start a revolution. Sometimes one act of courage is enough to remind people that change is possible. Sometimes refusing to let cruelty have the final word is the most powerful thing you can do. In the Whitmore house, on the walls of the entrance hall, where Victoria once humiliated staff members, now hung a simple plaque with words Victoria had chosen herself. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to love, even when fear tells you to hide. This house was reborn when one young woman refused to let fear win. May we always remember her example. Nobody dared say a word to the billionaire's wife until someone did. And in that daring, in that refusal to be silent, a household was transformed, lives were changed, and a new model for ethical wealth was born. All because kindness, it turns out, really is the strongest force in the world, when we have the courage to live by it.